delighted to launch our online global series called Daring to Leap. It's a series of conversations with corporations around the world and thought leaders who are talking about ESG and corporate purpose as the new business essentials. As part of these conversations, we're often asked about what courageous leadership is, or what is transformative leadership. We're delighted to speak to Carl Oxholm, a partner at PwC in Canada. Here's our interview.
So leadership fundamentally, from my point of view, is about influence. And it's really about how is it that you both influence the quality of your energy and thereby influence the energy of those that happen to be around you or that you have the privilege of having in your space at any given point in time. You reference courage as one of the virtues that might be of relevance, not only today, but into the future. And it's interesting. A lot of people may not appreciate the etymology of the word courage really derives from heart. And so to encourage someone is to literally infuse them with your heart, or to put your heart in action. And here we are in the midst of different trials and tests that we have going on amidst a global pandemic. And very often what we find is that ability to relate to one another in a way that is meaningful, in a way that really speaks to the best in who we are, is perhaps missing because we don't have that in-person energy exchange. And so one of the things I would comment on when you reference courage vis-a-vis the importance of it in leadership is understanding that it means your heart in action. So how do you evidence empathy? How do you evidence compassion? And you also asked, how does courageous leadership actually dovetail with purpose? Well, to that end, I'd like to step back and just say there are very few organizations around the world who do not have a stated purpose. In other words, a mission statement, a reason for being, a why, if you will. And yet I will suggest that just as a listener, for any of the listeners right now, just pause for a moment and give some thought to, so what is my organizational purpose? What is it that we say we stand for? What is it that we aspire to? Why is it that we exist? And what we find from having these conversations all around the world is there are very few among us who can actually answer that. So it's true that our organization has espoused a purpose statement and a mission, but it's also true that it isn't as practiced as otherwise possible to say, do I use my purpose as context for all the choices that I make from one moment to the next throughout my day? And it actually takes somebody to evidence a little bit of courage, a little self-awareness, an understanding of the need to align with your stated purpose in the very choices that you make throughout the day if you're going to help make believers out of others. In other words, it's very difficult to influence and ask somebody else to do something that you in turn are not role modeling yourself. Again, sometimes you might hear me reference the etymology of words just because we use different words so often without really maybe understanding where they derive from. So the etymology of the word profit is actually progress. And then you think about that in reference to purpose. Well, if you've just finished explaining to me what your purpose is as a leader of an organization, so you have a very clear mission in mind, you have a why that's well understood, and you understand that you want to make progress against that stated purpose, that mission, then I think you can actually have those two worlds mesh very nicely with one another. If instead what you're suggesting to me, and I don't mean you, that's a rhetorical you, for any of the listeners out there, if we're instead thinking that it's really all about we're in the business to make money as opposed to we make money because of the business we're in, that might sound like I just said the same thing, but those two statements are profoundly different. And leaders who really do understand why their organization exists take it upon themselves to make sure that they are a radiant exemplar of the same. What do I mean? It's wonderful to have a sense about why you exist as an organization. It's also critically important that you understand the values that your organization suggests it represents. The values of any company effectively represent the behavioral expectations of your brand. So while the purpose gives context for our choices, the values give us really a roadmap for the behaviors that are expected of us as leaders. Now, why is that so important? Well, if you speak to some of the most effective leaders in the military, for example, some of the 4-star generals, they will tell you that when under duress, we default to our level of training. So I'll say that again. When under duress, we default to our level of training. And earlier, we were speaking about the importance of courage. Well, if you're going to put your heart into action, and you're going to do it in a way that aligns with the best of what you say your organization represents, which is an understanding of the why and the how, then the best way to influence and make a believer out of someone else is to actually embody those very aspects and that very level of self-awareness yourself. In other words, if I make a habit out of asking everybody else to do something that I in turn do not live myself, there's an old expression that many of you may have heard, which is, your actions are speaking so loudly, I can't hear a word you're saying. And so the most effective, notice I'm saying effective, not right, wrong, good, bad. If we get into the land of right, wrong, good, bad, it's your opinion versus mine, you'll win every time. But if we talk about degrees of effectiveness, now that's really interesting, because that cuts to the heart of how's it working for both you and those people who happen to be around you. And one other little quick thought that many of the listeners will have heard about, Google is an organization very rich in research, but specifically related to data. And you may have read their report about high-performing teams. And so for a team to perform at its highest level, the one attribute that seems to trump all others is what they coined psychological safety. So again, coming back full circle, do you feel safe to voice your opinion in the midst of the board that you participate in, the executive group, the teams that you yourself may lead? When you look around the room and you assess the quality of the energy that everybody came into the room with, are you conscious of the need to at least sustain the energy where it is, but ideally, optimally, actually look to increase the quality of the energy in the room? It's always going to be us against the issue, never against each other. So as you listen to me share some of these thoughts, overlay that with how you typically have approached this and see if there just may be room for you to grow just a little more today than perhaps where you were yesterday. And that alone will allow you to be a student of your own experience, which will trigger more of the growth instead of fixed mindset. And that, hopefully, I think you will find proves to yourself. It's not about just listening to me or blindly believing anybody. When you're a student of your own experience and you pause long enough to really look around and say, am I actually conscious of making choices that align with what we say our stated purpose is? And am I living our values in such a way that others are inspired to do the same? So absolutely, it can be learned, but it starts with you role modeling in kind.